Um, it's my pleasure to introduce Usha back to campus. She was last year 4 years ago, I think. 4 years, no? 1990. Yeah. This started off as initially a conversation where we wanted to sort of perhaps hold a seminar or a workshop for a week on campus, but it was too short during this month. But we are hoping to do something like that based on, if I may, today's experiment, sometime in late November. So if you have critique, comment, and I think it'll be nice to make it a discussion more than a talk, which is why it's structured as an informal talk. We haven't done many of these in the archive, but we had the opportunity to drag Usha all the way from South Bangalore today. So thanks for doing that. I'll do a quick introduction. Some of you obviously know of her work, so I'll be quick about this. Usha Ramanathan works on the jurisprudence of law, poverty, and rights. She researches rights and speaks on issues that include the nature of law, the Bhopal gas disaster, mass displacement, eminent domain. Wait for this really covers the range, okay? Manual scavenging, civil liberties including the death penalty, beggary, criminal law, custodial institutions, the environment. She gave a talk on forest rights earlier this week. Judicial process, and so much more. She's also been tracking and engaging with the Indian National ID project, and I will not use the word that is used more often because I know she doesn't like it. And she's written and debated extensively on this subject. She's been writing and debating on issues relating to technology and the human condition of freedom and liberty over the years. She's been a member of various expert groups, including the one on privacy set up in the Planning Commission, which gave its report in October 2012, and of course things have changed drastically since then. She's been a member of a committee set up in the Department of Biotech to look at the draft human DNA profiling bill. There too, things have changed drastically since. And she's been a member of the committee set up by the PMO in 2013-14 to look at the socioeconomic status of tribal communities, and they gave their report to the government in 2014. In 2019, for the large body of work that she's done on looking at the Indian National ID project, she was also awarded Access Now's Human Rights Heroes Award. Today's talk is perhaps a departure from a lot of this, but it's sort of looking at a string of things, and I'm going to leave it to her to explain it. I'll just introduce the title, which is A Philosophy for Technology. Usha, thanks again, and we'll see how this goes. Thank you.
Avoided something around my neck all my life because it reminds me too much of the noose, and I work against the death penalty. Sorry. Very odd accoutrement. Okay, so I'm going to start with a confession. I mean, you're like my guinea pig audience, because I've been working around questions of technology, and I will also make the first statement about this, that I don't have a mobile phone. And so when I came this time from Delhi, and I was in the airport in Delhi, and I was going through security, the chap saw he saw the what do you call it? It looks like a tub to me, into which you put you put all the stuff, all your electronic stuff, and send it through the security machine. And he looked at my laptop, and then he said, you have to put your mobile phone too. And I told him, I don't have a mobile, sorry. And he said, "Aise kaise ho sakta hai? Download." So it kind of, it's something I've been thinking about for a long time, about what an artifact is and how an artifact becomes so important that the individual and the person gets subsumed in that artifact. I mean, without the artifact, you're not a person. So it was actually quite interesting being depersoned in that sense. I mean, like, you can't exist without it, so how can you go through? It's like you must be some kind of a ghost who's walking through the security, walking past the security person. And he looked particularly shocked when the bag actually went through without beeping that there was some technology stuff inside it. So it was a good start for me to come here. But I also felt I should make that confession because there are, I've been charged with not having a mobile phone and yet trying to talk technology. And if I were to just go back in time, I decided not to enroll as a lawyer because I felt I can't really critique the institution and critique the instruments that I used if I'm going to be a part of that system. So I felt it might help me to be outside the system, then I can look at it more clearly. So I've gained and I've earned for myself that space from where I can talk about technology because technology doesn't control my life. And that's not to say it's controlling all your lives. I'll leave that for you to figure out. I'm not going to tell you what I'm thinking about that. But why this was, I mean, be very clear this is going to be an informal talk. So, is because I'm trying to think through something that I have found it very difficult to think through. Because there are so many habits of thought in the head. And so much of language that has already got settled in the head. It's like you have to remove all that sediment to be able to see things in a different way. So I'll just say in the beginning why this is philosophy for tech and what is it that which is not philosophy for tech. So it was initially when we were looking at my engagement with technology really only started with looking at the excitement around me when the internet came into our lives, when we could, when email came into our lives, and we were traveling all over and we could suddenly be in communication with each other at no cost at all. It would be a huge task if you were traveling abroad and you had to call back home and tell them that you were okay, or that you'd forgotten something and needed something done. And all that became so easy that it was a lot of excitement. And then I watched the excitement of many of my friends, many people around me who'd spend like 3, 4, 5 hours on Facebook and come away feeling happy. I mean, it wasn't a sad thing that happened. It wasn't depressing. It was actually fabulous that, and people they'd never known for years and years, they'd forgotten they existed, resurfaced in people's lives. So it was very exciting in the first decade of this century and from about the end of the last century. And then something seemed to start changing. I don't know whether it changed outside, but it certainly changed the way in which I was seeing people adopting technology and responding to what technology was giving them, not doing to them, but was giving them. So and of course, in the meantime, the mobile phone had become ubiquitous. I remember the early years of the mobile phone where every call would cost 16 rupees even to receive a call. And I was a reporter in the Supreme Court for many years, so I would keep going back. I was not a reporter at the time that the mobile phone became ubiquitous, or just before it did. But I would go back there to watch proceedings, and I could see senior lawyers who would walk out of the thing and say, show people that they were talking on the phone, because not everyone could afford it. And then suddenly everybody could afford it. And, it was like it became very normal for everybody to have it. And then slowly I started seeing that it was changing behavior, it was changing the way in which people related to people. When there was a phone call, then the other people around them did not exist. And everything had to give way to what was happening on the telephone. And then of course the telephone becomes this instrument which is carrying the world, it's carrying our lives, it's carrying intimate information, it's carrying information about everyone we know. You have a Truecaller that picks up from everybody's directories, and it's reflecting people in various kinds of ways, sometimes funny, sometimes very funny. And so you see all of this, watching all of this happen. And then of course the UID came into our lives and then changed everything. So, and when I say it changed everything, it actually also has actually changed everything. But it also changed the way in which technology could start being thought about. And over the next 10 years, we saw a certain way in which we were being trained to think about technology. So there was a philosophy, very loosely called philosophy, of technology that emerged in that time. And that is kind of recognizable. it's not so difficult to see it, because I think we just know what those various elements of that philosophy are. And again, I'm saying I'm using philosophy really, really loosely. I'm a lawyer, and lawyers deal with facts and deal with evidence and supposedly deal with reason and then with unreason. So we are not philosophers. But in jurisprudence, we have to learn to think about ideas and not only about events or about meanings. We have to think about ideas. And that training kind of led some of us to say that, okay, what are we seeing is this, what is being said about philosophy, about technology, and what is the language that we are having to adopt now? And what is that language doing to the way in which we think about technology? So what I've done at this stage is only keep picking things up from different places which are making me ask questions. And I don't know, like I was telling Venkat, I don't know if there is something that will come out of this. I think there is something in looking for a philosophy for technology, which is different from of technology. I think it deserves an exploration. And that's broadly all that I'm going to be doing today. But to do that, I'll start with what were we saying when technology came in our midst, and then we had to reorient our minds to what technology was doing to us. What did we have to normalize? What meanings did we have to give to words? And how were we being asked to look at technology? And that was a starting point. That's not philosophy for technology. That's actually pre-philosophy for technology. So in that philosophy of technology, what people needed to know about technology, about not the creation, but what had been created. So not the creator, not the process of making it happen, but the artifact itself. And the ways in which we had to think about, the ways in which we were being asked to think so that we understand that technology is part of our lives and that we adopt that technology. So now I just want to make one distinction very clear. A lot of the writing that I've seen in the field of technology, in the social science of technology, a lot of it comes, of course, from the West. And their experience of it is much more through Silicon Valley and big tech. And ours is somewhat different. It's not like Silicon Valley and big tech don't make a difference to us. They are ruling our lives as much as they are ruling anybody else's lives. I mean, they think in terms of reaching the globe. They are not thinking in terms of having constituencies. They are thinking of the globe as the constituency. So it is hugely ambitious, and we know that they've done a number of things which I think, everybody here would have at some time or the other thought about, talked about, read somewhere, read a comment by somebody, read articles which are questioning this. So this has been happening. So big tech is one huge thing that looms wherever we are. The Indian context hasn't, however, got into much of this literature, because the Indian context came slightly differently. Here, because we have a very, a very wide, swathe of poverty, it's not about adoption of technologies and the use of technologies by the individual, which is much more what big tech has been about. But it's entered our area somewhat differently. So, which is why the UID becomes such a big thing, because the UID was the way through which technology reached every person. It's not, and now I'm not just talking about the mobile phone, which actually is much more ubiquitous than we would think, but it's also not as ubiquitous as we would think. For instance, broadly the population can be divided into three. 1/3 who have smartphones, perhaps, maybe a little less than 1/3, but anyway, 1/3 may have smartphones. 1/3 have feature phones, and 1/3 have no phones, which are in their name. So we presume that everybody has phones, and it's not about me. I mean, I'm an exception in the sense that I could have a phone. If I really wanted to have a phone, I could have a phone. But there are many people who can't, and therefore there are shared phones, there are family phones, because not everyone can be paying those bills, and so a lot of people get on to phones, and then they can't continue paying the bill, so then it stops for a while and then they come back to the phone. So it works differently for different people in different communities. In fact, this morning a conversation that I had told me that we really perhaps don't see beyond what we are able to see, which is that they were saying, we were talking about infrastructure and saying that things have changed in the past 15, 20 years and everything is much easier now. It's not like it was, where just finding your way from one place to another is so difficult. Okay, Bangalore has traffic problems, but it doesn't have a problem having no vehicles, having no metro. It has various ways in which you can actually reach from one place to another, even if it takes you an hour more. But you enter a railway station, the way you book your tickets, everything is different now. And so it's much easier. At one level, it's much easier, many of the things that we do. But then when we were talking, and everyone is connected, but then when we talk about getting out of Bangalore, Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, and just get out somewhere beyond that, which many of us don't do, then all of this is not a given. So many stories that have emerged from the rural areas, for instance, has been about how people have to climb a tree or go up a hill so that they can catch a little bit of that signal, because they need that signal to be able to put their thumbprint to get their food. These are all stories that are everywhere, but they don't become part of our mainstream conversation. So I would therefore just want to say that even when I'm saying that something is ubiquitous, it perhaps is not, and we need to keep that in mind. But the interesting thing about that is that those who are teaching us how to think about technology, about what technology represents, about what technology means, are telling us that it's ubiquitous. So this, when we think about why certain things are said and what they mean, some of this is also important. So some of the notions that have come into popular discourse over the past about a decade include privacy, and the discussions about privacy have sometimes been hilarious and sometimes deeply inaccurate, and sometimes they tell us something more than they should. So for instance, when the question of privacy came up, it actually became a big deal, not because people were screaming about privacy. It became a big deal because the government went to the court and said people of this country don't have a right to privacy. It's only when we are deprived of something or denied something that you suddenly wake up and say, hello, what do you mean I don't have the right to privacy? What do you mean I don't have the right to anything? I mean, whatever it may be that they say you do not have. And that's when people started speaking privacy. Till then, many people who were involved in these, actually many people anywhere, I don't think there was any conversation that happened about privacy. It was very marginal. Now it's become center stage because there was a denial of the right to privacy for people. So we know those debates. And in one of those, for instance, they said, people of this country don't care about the right to privacy. You'd have heard this many times. And that you get into a train and you'll find that everyone is telling each other about their whole lives. So what privacy are we talking about? I think that part of it is that yes, you can get into a train and tell any story you want about your life. You can make your life a story and say what you want and walk away without any consequences. So it is a great place to practice storytelling. To cook up your own, to reimagine your life. And I think many of us have done that. I know I have. I'm sure there are others here who've done that. But it is also that we are not talking about privacy at that level. We are talking about what happens when your story is something that you actually don't know, but some others know because they have managed to patch together various things about you that you did not know you'd left behind. Some of it you've left in different places. They are called digital footprints very gently and nicely, but you don't know that you left so many footprints. And then you are known in ways in which you don't know yourself. And that's an infliction of the absence of privacy, which is something that many of us may not want to accept. They would also say that, Indian languages don't even have a word for privacy. And actually that's very interesting. Actually many Indian languages did not have the word for privacy. And in that period, in 2015, when they said that there is no right to privacy, it was very interesting. You went from place to place and you would hear people in different states trying to figure out what would be the right word for privacy. Nobody thought about it before because there was no need. You didn't lose it, you didn't know you had it. And you didn't know that it was something that you needed to make a big deal about. And then suddenly you realize, with the state coming there and saying there is no right to privacy, that there is a reason why you're being denied this right to privacy. And then the conversation changes. The other, of course, is consent. So these two, the common way of saying it was to say privacy is dead, consent is broken, and therefore we just discard these two. Of course, in this country, I don't think we discard anything. We patch it up and we reuse it. But here we were being asked basically to discard it. Then the idea of innovation, that a philosophy of technology would foreground innovation, that nothing should come in the way of innovation. And therefore we need to reorder our lives so that we allow innovation to flourish. If you need rules and regulations, wait for innovation to be complete, and then we'll make the rules around what innovation has produced. Then the idea of the quantum leap, like it is a good thing. So in fact, when Venkat was showing me some papers in the archives today, one of the very interesting things that gets said is how scientists develop knowledge on the shoulders of those who've gone before. So there is a continuity to understanding, and therefore a way in which we are constantly knowing what there has been and then building on it. So it's not like you enter a new world by doing research. Research is searching and researching things that have been said before, done before, but you know that knowledge can go beyond this. Quantum leap, therefore, is something, in the philosophy of technology, they say quantum leap is a very good thing, and we all ought to be pleased that this quantum leap is happening. So these are things to question, these are things to debate, whatever. And of leapfrogging, that we don't need to go through, you go from agriculture and then you go through manufacturing. Now in many places you don't need to do that, you can just leapfrog into what technology provides. Now whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but this is one of the ways in which we're being trained to think about technology as a positive thing. The other is obedience, that technology requires you to be obedient to what is being asked of you, otherwise technology can't progress. So you need to fall in line, you need to, if they say come here, give me your biometric, you need to give the biometric. You can't keep fighting all these battles. These are different times. So technology requires you to act in certain ways. So this was, obedience was another. And adapting oneself. So we have to adapt to technology. So that's, this is how, and there are many more, I could go on, but these are just some of the major ways in which we found that the thinking about technology and the idea of technology and of what that relationship is that technology would have with all those which could be intrusions into the life of technology, what they needed to know and how they needed to view technology and what they needed to do in that context. So this was broadly what we were dealing with, what we were contesting, where we were demanding that thought shift in some other direction, that we don't accept this, and that some part of it is fine. And surveillance, that you normalize surveillance because surveillance is a good thing, it will keep you safe. And so this too needed an explanation. In our country it was different from what big tech was offering. Big tech was saying, I'm giving you so much for free, I'm connecting you with the world, I'm connecting you with the world of people, of events, of histories across time. When I give you all this, if I take a little bit of your data and then I'm going to convert that into something that is predictive, which will help me save lives in when there is an epidemic, wouldn't you want me to have this information? So big tech has this extraordinary ability to say that we are not just a technology, we are not technology majors. With our technology, we can enter the field of education, of health, of anything that you say. Because we have, everything goes through us and everything goes back through us, so we know what is happening everywhere around the world. And therefore there are things that we can do for you that you don't even know. So the world is changing because you're not on your own anymore. And we'll help you improve your life because we know what is happening everywhere and therefore we can secure you. We can also provide excitement for you, we can provide emotion for you, we can provide alternative realities because this reality is terrible. So one experience in recent times was for this G20, they had this artificial intelligence thing in Bhubaneswar, and we went to the stall, and there was one of the companies that was, showcasing virtual reality and an alternative universe. So then he explained to us what it was, and he said, the great thing about this is that you could be sitting under a tree, under a coconut tree, and you can open up the world, and actually you will find yourself in Paris under the Eiffel Tower, and you could then live your life, you could do all your work sitting there, and you can leave this world behind. And then he said, after some time you may feel, oh my God, I have to go and visit my mother, so let me just go back to that same reality, and you can come back in no time at all. So he was offering, and when we asked him, isn't it the job of all of us to be concerned about the world around us? Because if it's so bad that we want to escape it, who is it bad for? Is it bad for me and therefore I'm escaping it? Or is it that it's bad for many people and therefore I don't want to be seeing this, it doesn't suit me and I just want to escape from it? If that is the kind of escapism you're talking about, or escaping, not escapism, the escaping you're talking about, and finding another world, then what happens to the unequal world in which we live? I mean, how do we even engage with this? Does it help it at all? And he said, oh, there are other things in technology that will take care of that. So you can escape and you can go where you want. So it was a bizarre conversation, because it seemed like it was a believer who was telling us, and there is this idea, and I think for about 10, 12 years now, we've seen that this is a new faith. You have to believe in it. And it can see you even if you can't see it. So this is all part, and it will protect you if you will let it. So you have to reveal yourself to it so that it can protect you. And there are many such, one can expand on this. But it's, this is the way in which a new philosophy was being brought to us in the past 10 years. And it's just exploded. And, now we've been, in our own minds, we've been recast as people who need to know how to use a mobile phone, who have to be connected all the time, who have to, and all the rest of it. So yeah. Now the thing is, and the other very interesting thing was that we were being told about what we were worth. So, and that's a very interesting Indian phenomenon. It happened here in a really dramatic way, because one concept will explain that, which is the trickle-up concept. The trickle-up, those of you who are old enough will know what the trickle-down theory was, which is basically you have a big enough, pie, and then things will trickle down, and so everybody will have something. So, in a state where you were encouraging private enterprise, and where the state was also producing various things, they said, don't worry, you don't have to worry about every person. If you have enough, then it will trickle down to the last person. But then I think by now we know that what it does do then is to increase inequality in such a dramatic way that today we are talking about 1% of the population getting over 50% of the resources that have been created. So inequality has just grown. And it's also important that this kind of inequality has grown at a time when technology is saying that it is providing solutions to the problems that we have. So that I am a skeptic, that's plain. I don't think I need to even say it. I'm just saying it to say that I also recognize I'm a skeptic. I'm a tech skeptic. I'm not a believer. But I don't, yes.
So when you say that they are telling us this, who are you referring to?
So we'll figure that out. So there are things being created where we don't know who the creators are. But this is the conversation that's being sent out. Now when I say we have no privacy, I can tell you who said that, because it was said in open court. Many of the other things, for instance, the trickle-up theory, which basically says that, trickle down, we are not talking about, but trickle up is that in the West, they became economically rich before they became data rich. So they are in a different position. But here, most of the population is economically poor. What is it then that people have to offer to the economy? Your data. So the idea was that data will trickle up. And then once it's reached people who can use it, which is why we have personal data, we have non-personal data, all manner of data, which will then become a resource. Then that resource will be used to generate further wealth. So the trickle-up theory was about how personal data will enter the market, and that when it becomes a resource, that market will be created by various persons who do it. Now this theory was, I can footnote this theory too because it's known, it was in the Economic Times, and Mr. Nilekani had this trickle-up theory. So there are some of these that are attributable. Many of the others are recognizable. I think most of us would be able to see that it's happening somewhere in our, around us. So this is something that we learn to recognize as a phenomenon that is happening to us. So that's, so it does inchoate. In fact, one of the very interesting things is when two people who had been with the UIDAI stepped out of the UIDAI in about 2014, and then you have this India Stack and iSpert and all of them. So they had a hangout, Google Hangout. And in that they said, when we work within the UIDAI, because it's part of the government, we have to answer RTIs, we have to answer a CVC who might come, the Vigilance Commissioner. When we are outside, we have to answer no one. And we produce these things and then we can evangelize them back to the state. So when you see Niti Aayog having a document which is called National Health Stack, you can make your own conclusions, you can draw your own conclusions on where that might have come from. Because the stack has been used as part of India Stack, which has been created by one wing of iSpert. So you draw these connections, but we know that the language has come for us, and it's coming from somewhere. It's not dropping from heaven for sure, if heaven exists, which at this point I really doubt. So now this is, and we've had language like purification entering with, you purify the voter ID database. So the EPIC database has to be, it's actually there in the title of the project that they're going to purify. And in India, purification is a deeply sensitive and political term. But, tech providers are unaware of the politics of the state, so they use purification like it's a very normal thing, and it's not. Now, to do this, to explain why this needs to be done, in the first instance, you say, there are poor people need, in the UID case, which is where it started from, and from where it's proliferated into many other areas, you find that you talk about poor people who need to be able to reach their services. So we are offering this. We don't guarantee you the service, but if you take this ID, then you may be able to get the service more easily. Then after some time you say, well, actually we are not saying this, but everybody is saying that if you don't have this ID, you won't get the service, which is a complete inversion of where it came from. And all of this is offered as a certain way of thinking. And we have, very broadly, we have corruption, we have leakage as explanations for why this kind of system needs to come in. We have ghost, duplicate, fraud, terror, money laundering, leakage, inefficiency. So all these then become the reason for why you're thinking about technology in a certain way. So in all of this, the focus was on how we look at technology. My problem was that this is all very well, we do need to understand this, and this is where I'm actually asking for help. But we need to be able to see how this idea of technology views the human being. Who is the human being in all this? What happens to the human being in this? How does it get viewed? And there are some indicators that have come over a period of time. But before I say that, I'll just say one more thing because it's much quicker than the other part, which is that you also have another thing that's happening with AI becoming the major conversation around the world now, where there are various ways in which people are talking about AI. So if we were to take somebody like Sam Altman, who produces ChatGPT, who's part of the team that creates this. And ChatGPT, as you know, is not it's not an uncomplicated thing. It's pretty complicated in multiple ways. It's very convenient for certain things, and it produces many of the things that social media today produces. So it produces disinformation, it doesn't allow you to know whether something has been created by a person or not? Is it from the mind of one person? So do we know anybody at all? Since it uses artificial intelligence, actually the very interesting thing about artificial intelligence is that it can only work on the data that it has, and then it grows on that. And of course the code that's given to it. But what is not in that data? What is not part of that data? So even if it crunches everything that's on Google and on whatever else you have, in every book that has ever been written, there are many things about which nothing has ever been written but which is very real in our world. And that will not get reflected in this. So we actually did a little experiment with this, where we said, like I said, I'm opposed to the death penalty. So we said, let's ask ChatGPT to make an argument for the death penalty. About the death penalty, not for, about the death penalty. And the argument that it made was picking up on many of the arguments that have been made by people who are opposed to the death penalty. And we didn't get it, because it seemed like, it should be, at least there should be something that says that death penalty is a good thing, because that's what many people say, and it exists, it continues to exist in many countries, including ours. And then we realized that people who write about the death penalty write about it when they are bothered by what is happening. So all the literature in India, if you look, will be about people, large parts of the literature will be people who are opposing the death penalty, who are writing about the death penalty to say it should not be there. Those who support the death penalty don't need to say anything. The system is already there for them. So actually, in a very funny way, it distorted this, because it made it seem like everybody is opposed to the death penalty, whereas actually the reason that people who say that death penalty should continue, that position was not reflected in that ChatGPT collection that came to us, was because nobody needs to write about it. Why do I need to? If I already have it, why will I keep writing about it? It's only protesters and dissenters who need to speak. The others don't. They be talking about something else. So there are all manner of distortions that come in. But anyway, it is a very interesting thing in terms of technology and the moment in time. It is a very interesting thing that's come. But then what does Sam Altman do after that? He goes from government to government telling them, you know what, don't allow this to just go unregulated. Bring in regulations. So I will create something that is problematic, and then I will go from government to government and be the good guy by telling them, please produce regulations. When you know that regulations cannot deal with this, that regulations won't work, you can have them. You can have them to say that normatively this is what we think. But can you actually regulate something like this? It's highly questionable. Then you have Elon Musk. Elon Musk has all kinds of ideas about all kinds of things. He has about law too, which I won't talk about now. But and then he and 1,000 others sign a letter saying let there be a moratorium on AI, because it could lead us to an existential crisis where you don't even know if humanity will survive as it is. So in as short a time as when, why has it happened now? It's happened now because so much data has been collected about various things in the world. And so data exists, however incomplete, however misrepresented, there is a lot of data. So they're able to use that to generate, because AI needs to crunch on things for it to be able to produce other stuff. So now having done all of this, now they say 6-month moratorium. I'm really not sure what a 6-month moratorium is going to do. So we have 6-month moratorium, and then what? In the meantime, there will be people who have produced many more things along these lines. So now they've been saying that. You have Christopher Nolan, who's made the film Oppenheimer recently, and I was very intrigued. I think Times of India or something, there was a little thing which said Christopher Nolan says that AI is dangerous or something like that. So I just looked it up to see what he says. And he says AI dangers have been apparent for years. And after saying that it's a very dangerous thing and whatever, you can just Google, you'll find him saying it all over the place. He says the problem does not lie with AI, but with how people use it. The problem is never of technology. The problem is the people. So this is one. And then you have Jaron, I don't know how to pronounce him, Jaron Lanier. And he's the guy who coined the term virtual reality. And he's got this whole article which he's written saying AI is not real. If we stop mythologizing it, then we'll be able to deal with it. Because according to him, he says, who's creating AI? All of us are creating AI, which basically means we are putting data in many places and that's what's creating this AI. And he says, therefore, we just need to control that. It's up to us. But because we are mythologizing it and making it seem like AI is some terrible thing, we feel like it's like a threat. And he says it's not a threat at all. It's within our ability to control it and we are not doing it. So he wouldn't have AI questioned. And then of course you have the executive of Google, and then you have Margaret Mitchell, who's also part of Google at one time. They step out and they are furious with all these fellows, saying that you are talking about some kind of existential crisis that may come somewhere in the future. It's already upon us. And all this AI that you're creating is going to influence the way in which climate change is going to be dealt with, how nuclear power and the whole nuclear sector is going to be dealt with. So what do you mean about some crisis that may occur? The crisis is occurring now, and AI has a big role in how this is going to be dealt with. But it's not just AI. The other thing, of course, is that people in the world of technology and technology companies have become far richer, far wealthier than is good for anybody. So you have Bill Gates, for instance, saying, I'm going to put some substance, you're a scientist, you know all those words, but he's going to put some substance across the sun to cool the earth. Maybe it makes sense, but as an ordinary mortal, I just don't think that people should try to play God when they are far from it. So all this brought me to this, that okay, where are we in all this? Who are we? How are we being looked at? Who is the human in all of this? And there are some indicators that we've had where and before I go to that, I should have started with this. In my head at least, I make a distinction between science and technology. So I know it's treated like it's conjunct. I was going to say conjunctivitis, which it is not, but it's conjuncted by either a hyphen or an and. And I'm not sure that these two, one might flow from the other, but it doesn't have to. But they are different. In my head at least, science is about knowledge. And technology is about the products that come from whatever it is that they get from that knowledge. So these are artifacts, and this is knowledge. I have learned over the years not to question knowledge. Although, when people have certain kinds of knowledge, it seems like they are unable to stop themselves from using it. And that's a huge problem. So it's a dilemma, and it's a dilemma that comes again and again. It came with nuclear power. I was horrified when some years ago there was this discussion that happened at CERN, where they said, we're going to conduct this experiment which might result in the end of the world. And then people said, but why would you do that? They said, for scientific knowledge. And I'm like, yeah, right. So, you'll get the knowledge maybe. I don't know if the whole world has disappeared. I don't know who's going to have that knowledge. But that you believe that you can risk the whole world because you're pursuing your idea of knowledge is a problematic thing. I'm not able to say that pursuit of knowledge is a problem. I think pursuit of knowledge is the one thing that makes human existence exciting. So I can't say that. But taking it into your hands to decide whether the kind of thing that you do, in trying to produce that knowledge, whether it can completely collapse the world that we live in, and that can be decided by some people who are willing to take the risk. So, it's also a question of risk and who takes risk and who even knows risk is being taken and who knows what the risk is. So that, it's a problematic area. But technology for sure is about artifacts. It's about the things that they use knowledge. So when knowledge is produced, when that gets used to produce things, and then those things are brought to it, in my head at least, it doesn't have the same location, the same position that knowledge, that science has. So there is it's not a thin line. It's like a pretty thick line. So just to clarify that's where I come from. So some of the indications of why we need philosophy for tech. Because technology is asking us to think things, be things, adapt in ways to suit technology. But is that why we think technology should exist or it should be there? Is that how we think about it? We've all been trained into this, and these are habits of thought. So, if I can root out corruption, shouldn't you allow yourself to be surveyed? Shouldn't governmentality be allowed to take the place of rights of people? Isn't rights of people isn't it an obstacle to human progress? So why do you need rights if you can actually progress if you only give up some of your rights? Shouldn't duties be taking the place of rights? These are all questions that are, they are put to us in a way. It's the kind of thing when you say, I want privacy, they say, why? Why do you want privacy? What have you been doing? And of course, I'm old, I can say many things. And I do say that I've been doing many things that I don't want you to know, so why would I tell you? And if you think that I will never do wrong and that I should be moral and quiet and ethical and good, I'm sorry, I do many things that are wrong. And I will continue doing them because that produces excitement in my life. But they are not offenses. If they are not offenses, you have no business asking me anything about it. So why are you surveilling me? So the ways of thought, the way in which the question is asked, and if you read Yes Minister or Yes Prime Minister, you'll know how asking the question, which question you ask will produce a different kind of thought. So the thing therefore was that if we were to look at a philosophy, and I'll confess this too, that I'm trying to speak to a few philosophers to understand whether ways of thinking like this, as it develops, can be in the realm of philosophy at all, or whether I should give it some other frame for it. I don't know. I'm not too worried about that. I think at this point it's much more important for us to get out of this way in which we've been trained to think and think about it again to say, you started with saying that technology will be useful for the human being. How did you see the human being when you were saying this? Who is this human being? And there are indicators in different places. So I'll just give a few that I've been seeing. One is this idea of human obsolescence. I was horrified when I saw that. I didn't know that, data and whatever is coming around it would be producing this manner of thinking. I mean, I was doing a lot of questioning of what was happening around me. I don't think I thought of human obsolescence at all. And it came from an artist activist who's livid with all of us because we keep producing data for big corporations who then make us redundant. So if you read some of the interviews that have been coming over the past 3, 4, 5 years, you'll often see that they'll say 80% of the workforce will become redundant. And therefore you find that there is, for instance, it could be, I may be making a connection that's maybe not, need not be made, but the idea of a universal basic income. Don't give people work, there won't be work. So people are going to be rendered redundant. So just give everyone money in their bank so that they can come to the market and spend it and survive. And that will produce dependencies about which nobody will speak. So we are kind of left in that space. So this artist, activist, he has a website called Speculative Capital. And then when you go to that, and I've mentioned this a few times before, but I don't think it hit me as hard till I started not just thinking about it as a critique of tech, but as an understanding of who the human being is in this. So he has this where he says, the opening page, whatever the page is, he has it's like a machine, and there are planks on which people are lying, one to a plank, and they've got this something like a tiger skin. It's not a tiger skin, it's leather perhaps, which is around them, and what they are doing is doing the only kind of labor that they can do in this modern age, in this time, which is producing heat. Blockchain requires an enormous amount of heat. Technology is demanding a lot of energy. But it's not demanding any work that people like this can do. People who've been doing work earlier in various kinds, they're being rendered redundant. So what is it that they're going to be doing? They're going to produce heat which will then be converted into an energy which will go towards feeding these technological processes. So I have to confess, I recoiled in horror when I saw this. I thought maybe it's just an exaggerated imagination, but then found that he's actually got 38 people who are there producing heat and when you think about it, ever since the Industrial Revolution, there are many ways in which people have been rendered redundant. But we also know that the Industrial Revolution, and over a period of time, it's produced huge problems. I mean, climate change and pollution, all these are directly attributable to it. But it also produced a longevity, it produced something in health, it made life easier for many people, it also made war easier for many people. So there are, at every stage we are sitting and calibrating our response to many of these things. But now you have the world of technology basically saying, most of you are irrelevant to our system. So we'll have to find something, and not we have to find something else for you to do, and then you bring in this notion of human obsolescence. So if a human being is going to be made obsolete because of technology, should we be advocating it? Should we be running towards it with the enthusiasm that we are doing? Should we be thinking about what all of this is, at least before we start our marathon? In fact, we don't have to do a marathon, it's very quick. We just go and then we leap into this. So that was one notion that made me think that it is important to rethink, reorient the way in which we think about technology. And we need, when I say philosophy here, I mean we need a whole new way of thinking about the human, about the place of the human on earth, in society, and the relationship that the human has, the way in which the human will be looked at. See, when it was very interesting for me that in the privacy judgment, one of the judges, all the judges said that privacy is a fundamental right. And one of the judges was even more emphatic than the other, Justice Chalameshwar. But in his writing, he has a line there which says, citizens and non-citizens alike. Now this was actually a progressive statement that he was making, saying that we are not talking about this right as applying only to citizens. It is to citizens and non-citizens alike. And then in parenthesis, he says, who for convenience's sake we will call subjects. It completely misses the point. The whole point is we are not subjects. We've broken out of the idea of the subject and we are sent back to it because of a matter of convenience in the way in which you can address this. So it didn't tell me just about what it means to be a citizen and a subject and a non-citizen and whatever. It also told me the importance of language and the kind of thinking that can come with it. At one time we did a kind of exploration to see what would it be like. I don't know how many of you have read Kafka. If you haven't, please read it. Please read The Trial. It's a remarkable statement of what bureaucracies do. And we have to remember that governmentality is about bureaucracies. Whether it hides behind a screen or it is out in the field, it is still about bureaucracies. So Kafka wrote the story where a person is charged. The name that he gives him throughout is just K. You don't know what his name is because it's irrelevant. And then you don't know what the offense is because he doesn't know either. It's a he, that much you know. So it's a he and he doesn't know what he's charged with. But he goes through a whole trial and the trial keeps pulling on until the very end, and he's given the death sentence. And till the very end, he doesn't know what happened. What was he charged with? What happened with him? What is he supposed to have done? And why is he being punished now? So it is the maze of the bureaucracy that he writes about in that. It is nameless, it's faceless, it doesn't explain itself in any way. And then you find, so governmentality through technology produces a version of this where basically from the perspective of philosophy of technology, they are telling us that if the bureaucrat, if the person who's doing the work meets the people, there will be corruption. So the best thing is that they don't meet. So it's enough for them to see the people through the screen, through technology. It's called disintermediation. So you are where bureaucrats would be the mediator, the mediate person between the state and the people. Today you're withdrawing the bureaucrat and saying you don't need to see the people. And this comes at the same time as the word presenceless comes in our midst. So when they are talking about money transactions and eKYCs and using your thumbprint and what have you, They're saying that the great thing about this technology is that you can be presenceless. So it's an erasure that is then converted for the, in a philosophy of technology, it is converted into a virtue, where that you exist will only be stated by something remote. We don't need to see you. Now this comes at a time, and we hear about the population problem all the time, and we know that there are many people who have huge problems, that there are so many people in the world. In fact, one of the times that we woke up to it was in the mid-90s. There was an industrialist who put out 5 advertisements in the Hindustan Times, huge ads. Every day the picture would change. It was supposed to apparently to have gone on for 10 days, but Hindustan Times pulled back on it because they realized what was being said, and I think it was just too embarrassing. So they had this ad where the picture would change and the text would remain the same throughout. The picture every day would be of a tarpaulin, some a woman there sitting there, very dirty, and 2 children around, leaky noses, and then the text would say, and I'll say it in brief, it said it in many words, that when my wife had her sterilization surgery, I was very proud because we had 2 children and that would be it. But look at the picture above. This is the kind of person who's now having children. If I had had children, I would at least have brought them up well, and they would have been, worth something to the nation. But these are the people who are having children, so I regret it now. Now the story continues, but we don't see the connection till we actually realize that industrialist found himself in prison some years later for having taken money from, in chit fund kind of thing from many people around the states and not having returned that money. So it was a huge scandal that carried on for a while. So, this, the classist idea that if I am rich, I may go to prison, but I am still the person who could have produced something good. And that the poor don't have a right to their existence is not something, I work on law and poverty and I've seen this everywhere. Every policy produces something like this. So the poor can only be there as supplicants. So what is given to them is a benefit or a service or a subsidy. The idea of entitlement and right just walks out of the window. So it's always by sufferance of the state. And we've seen, for instance, unfortunately today my favorite whipping boy is becoming Bill Gates, unfortunately or otherwise. But there's a very interesting video. It was in 4 parts about who is Bill Gates, and he makes a very interesting statement in one of those where he shows a graph of the population of the world and says, you look at how what the population was in 1900, and then look at what they are in 2000, what it is in 2000, and it's just grown exponentially. So he says, Melinda and I wondered whether we should take vaccine to Africa. Because if you take it there, then more children will survive, more people will survive, and it will be, large numbers of, there will be a population growth, and it's a huge problem. Then he said, but then, and that's the palliative in this, he says that, but then we thought about it and said that actually if you give them vaccination, then more children, less children will die, and there will be less incentive for them to have more children. And therefore, we decided that we'll go ahead with this. Now the point, obviously he's a good man, and that's the reason that he says that he didn't want to carry this through. But that any man and any person can have this kind of power to make a decision of who will live and who will die, and that you can see the way in which people in various conditions of poverty are treated by policy and by many of us. I don't think we can exclude ourselves from this at all. What do we think when we see so many poor people around us? So with this approach, how do we see the human? And there are a few more things, but I think I've just gone on too long, so I'll stop with just one more thing, which is that there's a very interesting video on YouTube where the Dalai Lama went to Europe, and he was introduced. It's actually quite a moving video, because there are technology creators who've made these made various kinds of things like prosthetics of various kind, and in ways in which children who are unable to go to school can virtually participate in, say, school picnics in the classroom and feel a part of it and not feel left out. They actually have one girl coming there to sit and talk to the Dalai Lama, walking down, both her legs are gone, her hands are gone, but she is able to be fully functional because of this kind of support that's given. And I too thought, and I still think that when people who can produce technology concern themselves with this kind of pain and suffering and are able to alleviate it, I think it's fabulous. And I think it really should be done. So after showing all of this, and it not should be done, but it should be appreciated. At the end of all of that, the Dalai Lama, they asked the Dalai Lama, they asked him, so, you've seen all of this, what do you think about these technologies? Do you have a few words that you can tell us? And he says, what you've done is remarkable. What you've done is very good. It's, that you're concerning yourself with the pain of others is a very good thing. But you may also want to remember that your technology can only go so far, because it can't go to everybody. Everyone with pain and suffering in the world, you can't go there with it. So in Africa, you have many people who are hungry, who don't have, and in Afghanistan, you have people who lost their limbs. You can't take this to everybody, but there is something that you should never forget can reach every person, and that is compassion. Technology cannot substitute for compassion. I think that for me was the starting point of thinking, so what is technology thinking about the human? So when I say a philosophy for technology, I'm saying if technology is thinking about the human, what would it be right? I mean, how should technology be thinking about it, and who is the human in all of this? So this is actually really an appeal, because I just feel that we've fallen into so many practices of thought, and so much of this has been fed to us. We need to find our own ways of thinking about all of this, and this is just an exploratory, I was going to call it a conversation, but I've gone on in a monologue for so long, I can't call it a conversation. I just hope it becomes that after this.
Question on this. This is what we are seeing in tech is nothing new.
Sorry, say it again.
What we are seeing in tech today, what you described, which I happen to agree, which I also agree with, is putting a compliment. I'm just saying historically, it's probably not as new as we think. We had the Industrial Revolution when the TV and Industrial Revolution. You're asking, we know how people were seen. They were seen as factors of production, or actually for factors of production, time and motion, all this kind of thing. Then when TV and radio came in, the most effective use of the Nazis, right?
Yeah.
And now we have this tech which started somewhere and is going somewhere else. I'm just wondering, on a more optimistic note, that when we look at history, things get very bad and all these issues happen, and then there's a kind of self-correcting mechanism where the pendulum swings to the other side. The downside, of course, is that things get very bad before it swings back, but it does swing back. Is that something you see happening in this as well?
I'm not entirely sure I agree with you that it swings back. That's part of my, yeah. And the reason is this. I think, for instance, I think the liberalization, I think it was fantastic for a while. And it produced freedom for many people. And it produced wealth and resources for more people than had ever had it before. But after the first 15 to 20 years, we find that it started going somewhere else. And it's not just about opening up, it's not just about opportunity, it's also about appropriation, it's also about the nature of the state changing, because the state is then having to become a player in this, and then it has to decide whose side it is on. And we've seen systematically that whether it's minorities or it's the poor or it's caste question, that there doesn't seem to, the post-emergency, the one good thing that it did here in India is that it opened up many democratic movements. And therefore, lots of people felt that when they were wronged, they need to speak up, they recognized the wrongs done to them, all of this happened. And then now you find that there is, and it's not only because of, a government at a particular, like now, It's not just about that. It's also that there are many people at play in this. So today, I find that the relationship between a certain kind of technological interest and the state has been taught to coalesce. I think that may ease up after a while. So there are some elements in this where I don't think shame will do it, but other things may do it. So that may ease up. But I'm not sure that these structures of power and imbalance that have been set in will go away as easily, or even will get morphed into something else that easily. Unless, which is why I'm even making this effort, unless we make it our business to change the way of thinking about this. That may help somewhat. I'm not saying it's going to change it. But for instance, I think the labor movements through those years was very important, because without that, the working classes would have been in even a worse condition than they were. But I'm not able to say the working classes' condition improved in a historical sense. It improved for a while, and then you find that again, no trade union, no collective bargaining, no minimum wages, no minimum conditions, 12 hours. So I think that what this technology is doing. See, television and the film. I mean, Hitler used film too in a huge kind of way. All of them, and the radio. The leaders were able to use it. Those who were in positions of power were able to use it to get what they wanted. And then there is a time when they democratize, and then it goes off again. So if we don't question the nature of it, and then we don't recognize the person, see, all of these have happened. The improvements, when they happen only when you recognize the human being. When it is only about technology, it won't happen. If it had been only about television and what it produces, or the working classes, you needed a working class movement. You needed them to come out onto the streets and speak. You needed to see them. You needed to know that they are human. It's only then that shift happens. I don't see that happening in technology. Partly because it's much more hidden than we realize. But why I want this is also because I'm hoping that can produce some shift in thinking. That's all.
Sorry, I won't take up much time, and this is not meant to start with. Just a point. One of the things that does occur is that there may be a cultural aspect to this.
Yeah.
So, for example, in India, that nexus is, and from the way we observed previous year, we don't have a word for it. Whereas in a place like Europe, it may behave differently. So that's just something to consider.
Yeah, actually, I was very surprised at what kinds of people value privacy here and will never talk about it. Teenage girls, young women, women who are battered, LGBTQI people who are not ready to come out. You can just keep listing them. There are so many, and technology captures all of them in ways where that privacy is stripped off of them. So, yeah, I mean, since it's just a conversation, I'm making a comment in return rather than, I'm not making it an answer. I'm just saying that that's the thought that it provokes.
Yeah, you asked how does technology view the human? I was reminded of this little graphic that was going online many years ago, which said that every app that we have become, which has taken over our lives in many ways, and to the extent that we allow it to take over our lives, can be mapped against one of the 7 deadly sins. So you have, one for sloth, which is say Netflix.
Right.
You have one for envy, which is Instagram. You have one for lust. You have one for wrath, which is Twitter, and so on and so forth. So each of the deadly sins has got an app, which also makes you wonder whether there is at the risk of sounding like a conspiracy theorist, a kind of a cynical appropriation of saying, listen, there are these sins, and if we can find apps to fulfill or give humans the way to indulge in those sins, then we are on a gravy train, and so that it is perhaps both cynical and perhaps true. Do you see, on the flip side, what would the human virtues be, and why, or do we have technology or apps that seek to fulfill the virtues, not just the sins?
Can I just, I'm not answering the question, I'm just making a comment which comes along with it. Actually, I have found that needing to be an impeccable human being, needing to be virtuous, needing to find virtue, I don't think that's why I have my freedom. I have my freedom to be whatever it is. So, And if I'm going to be trying to find virtuous things that technology can do, I'm in the service of technology, which I have no intention of being. Because I actually think that any artifact created should be with the human being in mind. And now I'm just being, anthropocentric, but because the others don't come into this. Whereas actually, if I were to just broaden it out a little bit, in 2010 there was an interview with Sam Pitroda where he was much more honest about what these projects were about, and I don't think he's the guy who got us rural telephony, and I thank him ever and ever for that. And I really blame all of you people who have cell phones that I'm not able to find a phone when I go somewhere, whereas Pitroda provided that for me. In 2010, he gave an interview to Hindustan Times, where he said, the GIS will map every resource, the UID will map every individual, and they had this public infrastructure, PII, public information infrastructure, will map every institution. So then, everything will be clear and fine. And so the not understanding the nature of power, partly maybe because he was also part of the power structure, he didn't see how anyone could do harm with it. So my problem is that many of these things started virtuously. It started very nicely. I mean, when you hear the guy who set the internet up, Tim Berners-Lee, and you find him saying that this is not what I got this internet for. So we need to produce something else so that people can migrate to it. This is not what I did it for. We know that never mind what we produce, power and control has ambitions that are different from whatever our reason for giving it to them maybe. So I just feel that at this stage, I mean, I know I will have to go beyond this, but at this stage, I just want to be able to break out of the habits of thinking that we've got into, in thinking about technology first before we think of the human. And then also questioning, also understanding where the human being is in the vision of that technology. Because it's possible that there can be good things that come through technology. I have no doubt about it, which is why the first 10 years we all sat and enjoyed it. And then you find that it's not as innocent as it is, and then money comes into it, power comes into it, then big tech, then people here who will collaborate with the state, and then state power, and then it gets very complicated. I particularly worry because there are certain kinds of people for whom there is less and less tolerance by systems. So if you are not productive, then why should I really be worrying about you? You're just a drain on the system. So if they say now that NREGA, why should I put more money into it? Or if you say in PDS, well, if people fall off the system, let them find their way back in. These are not innocent things that happen. These are ways of thinking. And so at this point, I know we'll come to the point that you're saying at some stage to see, is there some other way in which we can train technology? For me, that is the next step. You've reached it already. I would have to wait to come to that point where I say, if I'm able to find the language and the concept and train technology to have to acknowledge this, then what would we have? For me, it's the next step. I'm really floundering at this stage. I just know that this is not okay. And yeah, so I'll put that down. Thanks.
One question, we can continue outside. Question of
It was very insightful talk. I feel technology a bit like technology and capital is very interlinked with the strong force of greed and power, you can say, because if we see historically, so technology always served a class. I see a class in Nazi's period to industrial time too, and now there was two classes that was closely, being distinction was the clear, lower working class and the other class. So now this time when the digital capitalism we can see here, and these people are more having more wealth than any other. So with liberalization, as you mentioned, a new class emerges, or the number of the people in that middle class emerges, and they got welfare and all those things. Now is the time, I think, that middle class is becoming more consumer. Like you can see first lower class, all those working class, their blood sect and all those wages getting lower and all. But today middle class also through social media thing, through all those things, they are being made more consumer. Like the first you'll get the wealth, all those welfare, and then you have to spend all those money for a person, for that wealthier so-called digital things, all those things. So this is how I think capital and technology is closely associated. Without extracting capital or dividing capital from technology, I don't think there is a way out of it. There will, you say presenceless and all those things. Presenceless was before time too, like before digital thing. Those working class were presenceless, or you'll say alienated from the human population. We were wearing the shirt, we were wearing all those television, all those things, but we don't see their suffering, their terrible lifestyle and all. Now it is the presenceless or alienation of middle classes, as I think. So this is just a comment. Yeah, indeed it was a very nice and inspiring.
I'll just say one thing. I'm not going to, because it's an interesting comment and I'm going to leave it as just one small thing. One of the things that interested me in this whole thing was, many of the people who've become the wealthiest in the world today have become wealthy. Some of them, like Gates and all, have wealth from before. But there are many others who became obscenely wealthy when they were giving us everything for free. It doesn't add up. What was happening? So, and there are some answers we have now. They say advertising revenue, this, that, whatever. But there is a way in which we are being taught to think that we are getting things for free, that we are being taken care of by the system. And so there is a mind game being played with us where we therefore become consumers of that system too. So I think the new class that has been created, it's not the old capitalist class necessarily, and it's not even in the form in which the old capitalism existed, because many of these people were part of the workers, not the working classes, but part of the workers who have now become, the newly wealthy, who control not only companies, who not only have access to governments, but who control philanthropy too. So it's a deadly mix. So that's the other part which I'm going to, which I have to follow up and see, because if philanthropy is coming from the people who are actually taking all this and asking us to think about technology like this, what does that philanthropy produce and how does it view people? I'm not very sure. So this is the next few steps.
Thanks again. Thanks, Usha. Hopefully takes this as, hopefully it works out into a more structured conversation in a few months.
Basically, he's saying he hopes I would have done some more work before I get it.
Not my words. But thank you. Thanks again. Thanks for being here.